Since they finally threw out the old garbage college football playoff system and replaced it with 12 teams, we can now have a lot more fun trying to predict the college football playoff bracket, do bracketology, and more teams are going to get a chance to compete in the postseason that actually matters. We're going to go through each conference and talk about which team I believe will win the conference, what the best group of 5 team is, and then ultimately I'm going to pick champions for each conference, make a bracket, show you guys where each team is ranked, and then the teams that just missed out. But before we get started, if you're a big fan of college football, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I can cover next. Now let's get started and do some bracketology. Okay, so we're first going to talk about the group of 5. They will get the 12th overall seed in the 2025 bracket, and currently I have 9 teams that I think are still in the running for that final spot. At number 9, we have Sam Houston State. I know it's extremely far-fetched, but currently the Bearcats are 4-1, with their only loss coming to UCF. They've beaten Rice, Hawaii, New Mexico State, and Texas State, and they honestly have a favorable schedule to the point where they could end up going 11-1. They'll face off against Liberty, so one of those two will eliminate themselves. Sam Houston State's in the running, but just barely. Currently, Eastern Michigan is the best team in the MAC, as they have wins over UMass, Jacksonville State, St. Francis, Pennsylvania, and Kent State. Their one loss comes on the road to Washington, and for the remainder of their schedule, they get to play Toledo at home. That is the next best team in the MAC, and they also skipped out on Northern Illinois. If Eastern Michigan goes 11-1 and wins the MAC conference, then they would have an opportunity to get that last bid depending on different circumstances. So the next team to talk about is the Memphis Tigers. Their resume is a little bit better than others as they have a huge road win against Florida State, but honestly that is not looking good anymore, but they also beat North Alabama, Troy, and Middle Tennessee. Sandwiched in there is a loss to Navy, who is also on this list, so Navy will have to fall apart, and Memphis would have to win out, and they don't really have that many good games, except for road matchups against USF and Tulane. If Memphis wins out, and Navy stays strong, then Memphis could get that last spot. Right now, a team that has a legitimate shot at getting that last spot but suffered an early season loss was Boise State. They're ranked number 21 in the country, have the best running back in college football in Ashton Jeanty, and so far have wins over Washington State, Portland State, and Georgia Southern. They have that 3-point loss to Oregon, and if I had to power rank all the group of 5 teams, I would have Boise State at number 3, but they do have that one loss, so they're going to need some help if they want to get that final spot. Luckily, they get to play against number 25 UNLV on the road, and they get Oregon State, so if they can win both of those games, then they will finish at 11-1, and will knock another team out of the way. The last team is Army. Army's only on here because they're undefeated. Army's beaten Lehigh, Florida Atlantic, Rice, and Temple, and none of those wins mean anything. Army does have an opportunity though. If they in fact go undefeated, they will have beaten number 14 Notre Dame and Navy. Navy's currently on the list, and Notre Dame is also a playoff contender, and if Army were to go 12-0 with 2 quality wins like that, they would probably get that last spot, but I really doubt that happens. Okay, so honestly I think it's a 4-team battle right now for that top seed, and at number 4 we have the Liberty Flames. Liberty has a really good quarterback in Caden Salter, and they also are coming off a great season last year, but their schedule is terrible and it's going to hurt them. They beat Campbell, New Mexico State, UTEP, and ECU, and none of those 4 wins are going to do you anything. Their game against Appalachian State was canceled, and I'm not sure when they're going to redo that. And when you take a look at the rest of the schedule, their 2 best games are to come against Western Kentucky and Sam Houston, and both of those games are in the final 2 weeks. It could be really exciting, as I do think Sam Houston and Liberty are going to fight for that potential spot here in the Conference USA, and that'll be interesting to watch. Liberty, though, needs a lot of help. Navy, on the other hand, has a solid win, as they beat Memphis in Week 3. That right there is a decent resume booster, and they've also beaten Bucknell, Temple, and UAB. When you take a look at the rest of the schedule, they have 4 games that are worth noting. They have a game against USF on the road, which is decent, Tulane at home, and they also have Army. Army right now is undefeated, and this is the most hyped up Army-Navy game we have ever seen potentially. The big game though is number 14 Notre Dame. If somehow, some way, they could end up beating Notre Dame, USF, Tulane, and Army, I do feel like that would be a good enough resume to justify putting Navy in that 12th spot. We'll have to wait and see, but Navy has some work to do. Really, right now, the main 2 teams that I really think have a good argument are James Madison and UNLV. James Madison comes in at second, as they beat Charlotte and Gardner-Webb in Week 1 and Week 2, and then most recently beat North Carolina 70-50 on the road. That is an impressive resume booster, and then they beat Ball State 63-7. Right now, James Madison is firing on all cylinders, and for the remainder of their schedule, there's a good chance they can go unbeaten. Games against Coastal Carolina and Appalachian State do intrigue me, and the rest of them should be pretty easy. UL Monroe might be a little tricky this upcoming Saturday, but James Madison will have that good resume win over North Carolina, and if they go undefeated, it'll be hard to keep them out. The only team that really has a chance to be better than them is UNLV. Currently, they're ranked number 25 for the first time in school history, and they have 3 good wins. They beat Houston on the road in Week 1, Kansas on the road in Week 3, and just dismantled a good Fresno State team in Week 5. They also beat Utah Tech, and currently the Rebels are 4-0. If somehow, someway, they can beat Syracuse, Oregon State, and Boise State, then they will have a really, really good resume, and it'll be impossible to keep them out. Sadly though, I think they're going to trip up against either the Orange, Oregon State, or Boise State, which ultimately puts me at a crossroads here. I think UNLV is the best and most deserving team of making the playoff, but I think James Madison is the best chance at getting it. But we're going to do this week by week. For now, UNLV takes that 12 seed and they lock that spot in, and James Madison will be thrown into the at-large pool. I also wanted to highlight 2 other group of 5 teams that I think have an opportunity to get back on the list, and the first one is Toledo. Unfortunately, Toledo had a really dumb loss to Western Kentucky this past weekend, which is not going to help them, but they did have that huge road win against Mississippi State. Beating an SEC team on the road is ginormous, and if they can go undefeated and beat Eastern Michigan and Northern Illinois in the process, but in that case, they probably have to be the only one-loss team though. The only other team I could see making an effort here is Coastal Carolina, as they have wins over Jacksonville State, William & Mary, and Temple, but most recently they lost to Virginia. They'd have an opportunity to get decent wins in James Madison and Louisiana on the road, and if they were somehow to go 11-1, they would need a lot of help too, but for now they're going to stay on the list as a bubble team. Now we get to have some more fun. We're going over to the SEC first, but at number 7 we have the Ole Miss Rebels. Ole Miss was considered a playoff lock for quite some time, but they just messed everything up. They played a terrible non-conference schedule where they beat Furman, Middle Tennessee State, Wake Forest, and Georgia Southern, but then just dropped a home game to Kentucky. I think Kentucky is just below average in the SEC. This is a bad loss for them, and all of a sudden, they have to beat LSU, South Carolina, Oklahoma, Georgia, and Arkansas if they want a chance at making the college football playoff. They cannot afford another loss in my eyes, and Ole Miss just made things very difficult for themselves, but they still only have 1 loss. At number 6, we have the LSU Tigers. Despite losing to number 23 USC in Week 1, LSU has gotten better. They beat Nicholls State, they beat South Carolina, they beat UCLA, and they beat South Alabama. They're now 2-1 against Power 4 teams, and they'll have a huge matchup in 2 weeks against Ole Miss. I think the loser of this game pretty much plays themselves out of the playoff, and then from there, they'll play Arkansas, A&M, Bama, Florida, Vandy, and Oklahoma. Honestly, if LSU wins out and their only loss comes to Bama, I think they have an opportunity to potentially squeak in, but they really need to finish with 1 loss if they want to secure themselves a spot. At number 5, we have the Missouri Tigers. Going into the year, Mizzou was considered a team that should make the playoff, and through their first 4 games, they are still unbeaten. They beat Murray State, Buffalo, number 24 Boston College, and most recently Vanderbilt. While none of those 4 wins are that amazing, Mizzou's schedule lines up for them to potentially go 10-2 or 11-1, which would be just enough to probably get them into the bracket. They'll have a huge test on the road against Texas A&M, but outside of that, their schedule isn't that terrible. They play Bama on the road, which will be very difficult, but they get Oklahoma at home, and South Carolina may not be as good by then. Right now, Mizzou is undefeated, but I'm not quite sure if they're going to make the bracket this week. At number 4, we have the Georgia Bulldogs. I know it's weird ranking a 1-loss team over an undefeated team, but Georgia has one of the better wins, which is that Week 1 victory over number 14 Clemson. Besides that, they also beat Tennessee Tech and Kentucky, and only lost to Bama by 7 points. Having 1 loss to Alabama is not the end of the world in the new college football playoff era. I still think Georgia could probably lose 1 more and still get in the bracket, but they don't want to risk that. They have road games against Texas and Ole Miss, and also have to play Tennessee at home and have to play Georgia Tech. Things are difficult for Georgia, but for now, they're on the right side of the bubble in my eyes. Another SEC team is the number 4 Tennessee Volunteers. Tennessee has been firing all cylinders as they beat Chattanooga, number 24 NC State, Kent State, and most recently got a big win on the road against Oklahoma. Right now, the Volunteers are undefeated, have 2 wins over top 25 teams, and are on the right side of that bracket bubble. This week's game against Arkansas could be challenging, and they also still have to play Bama and Georgia. Besides that, though, they play Mississippi State, Vanderbilt, and Florida, and Tennessee has a favorable schedule to get all the way to the bracket ultimately. At number 2, we have the Texas Longhorns. They beat Colorado State 52-0 in Week 1, beat UTSA 56-7 in Week 3, and also beat UL Monroe 51-3 in Week 4. Their other 2 wins came against Mississippi State, which counts as a Power 5 victory, and they also went on the road and got an extremely impressive win over number 10 Michigan. They won that game 31-12, and currently Texas is 5-0, and they will be the first SEC team to lock in a spot in my eyes, as I'm going to place them at number 5, because currently I think Alabama is the number 1 overall team. Bama beat Western Kentucky and USF in weeks 1 and week 2, then they beat Wisconsin on the road, and most recently beat number 2 Georgia. That game was absolutely crazy and was the game of the year, and Bama right now is doing tremendous, as Jalen Milroe, the frontrunner for the Heisman in my eyes. They're 4-0, and things are going well for them. They do have some tough games though. They have to play at Oklahoma, at LSU, and at Tennessee, plus they have a home game against a top 10 Mizzou team. There's a world in which I see Bama dropping one of those games, but ultimately, right now, I'm picking the Crimson Tide to win the SEC, and they're going to lock in a spot in the top 4 and lock in a bye. Going over to the Big Ten, the first team we need to talk about is Illinois. So far, their resume includes wins over number 19 Kansas and number 22 Nebraska. Nebraska is looking like a decent win, but they most recently lost to Penn State. Illinois is now behind the 8 ball, but if they can beat Michigan and Oregon and win out, they will definitely go to the college football playoff in my eyes, because they only lost by 14 to Penn State. USC is also on the list right now, as they have that huge victory over number 13 LSU in week 1. They also beat both Wisconsin and Utah State, but they lost by 3 on the road against Michigan. Luckily though, USC has a couple of opportunities here, as they'll still play Penn State and Notre Dame. I think there's a real shot that USC goes 10-2 this season, as I think they'll probably lose one of those Penn State or Notre Dame matchups, and that would put them right on the cusp. After that, we have Michigan. Michigan beat Fresno State and Arkansas State, but then sandwiched between that was a loss to Texas. That was a game that the Wolverines really needed to win, but not all hope is lost. They got a big win over number 11 USC, and they still have an opportunity to get quality wins over Illinois, Oregon, Indiana, and number 3 Ohio State. If Michigan goes 11-1, or maybe even 10-2, they have a chance at squeaking in as an at-large bid, and potentially also winning the Big Ten and clinching a spot as well. Up next, we have the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. Who actually thinks that Rutgers has a chance at making the playoff? I don't, but still, they right now have a resume that puts them in contention. They beat Howard and Akron in week 1 and week 2, and most recently have 2 back-to-back Power 4 wins over Virginia Tech and Washington. While neither are that huge for the resume, they are still 4-0, and if they can beat Nebraska this weekend, they will be cruising. Rutgers has to play USC on the road, and they get to play Illinois, but they avoided Michigan, they avoided Ohio State, and they avoided Penn State. If Rutgers can find a way to go 11-1, I think they have a chance at breaking into the playoff, and that would be nuts. Up next, we have the Indiana Hoosiers. They're currently ranked number 23 in the country, and so far they're 5-0. They have wins over Florida International, Western Illinois, UCLA, Charlotte, and Maryland. In terms of power rankings, many aren't going to have Indiana near the top, but honestly, they have a chance of getting to the playoff if I actually look at their schedule. They get Washington, Northwestern, Michigan State, and Purdue, and then they have 2 extremely challenging games against both Ohio State and Michigan. They get the Wolverines at home. I think there's a real chance that Indiana could go 10-2 at this point, and if they can somehow pull off an upset against either Michigan or Ohio State, then who knows, maybe Bloomington, Indiana will get to watch their team in the playoff for the first time ever. At number 3, we have the Oregon Ducks. Right now, they are on the cusp of being in this week's bracket, as they have wins over Idaho, Boise State, Oregon State, and UCLA. 2 of those are road victories, and right now they have 3 solid wins on their resume. Oregon, though, has a difficult schedule. They have to play Ohio State, they have to play Illinois, they have to play Michigan, and they have to travel to Wisconsin. None of those 4 games will be easy, but if Oregon can find a way to get out of there 10-2, then like the rest of these teams, they got a chance at it. At number 2, we have Penn State. I know some would say that Penn State has shown more than Ohio State has so far and should be ranked higher, but I'm going to say Penn State's number 2. Yes, they have wins over West Virginia and Illinois, but that West Virginia win is not looking as good anymore, and then they also struggle with Bowling Green, and they beat a Kent State team who's not worth anything. Penn State has an interesting schedule. They still have to play USC on the road and number 3 Ohio State at home, but other than that, none of these games seem all that terrible, and the only trap game in my eyes is that road game against Wisconsin. Penn State, in my eyes, should be cruising to their first college football playoff appearance. At number 1, we have the Ohio State Buckeyes. I know many of you guys are annoyed that I won't rank them higher in my weekly undefeated ranking list, but again, they haven't beaten anybody yet. They finally got their first Power 5 victory over Michigan State, but now I can put the Buckeyes where they properly are. They've dominated in their 3 other wins against Marshall, Western Michigan, and Akron, and they've played so well that I think they're going to cruise through the Big Ten. Yes, they have road games against both Penn State and Oregon, and they also have a home matchup against number 23 Indiana, but Ohio State should be able to get through all 3 of those games. They also play number 10 Michigan at home, and I don't think that it's going to happen 4 years in a row. So in my eyes, Ohio State is going to be the team I pick to win the Big Ten, and they're going to lock in a top 4 seed and a bye. Heading over to the Big 12, we're going to try to go a little bit quicker now. Honestly, there are only 2 teams in the Big 12 in my eyes that are actually fighting for a college football playoff spot right now, but there are 5 who are in the running for it. But there are 5 others that also could play their way into the mix. At number 7, you have Texas Tech. Currently, the Raiders are 4-1 with wins over Arizona State, Cincinnati, North Texas, and Abilene Christian. They have a loss to a Washington State team, which will not look good on their resume, but if they were to somehow win out or win the Big 12, they could be there too. Utah's in the same boat, as after beating Southern Utah, Baylor, and Utah State in weeks 1 through 3, they finally got a marquee win against Oklahoma State in week 4. It was all looking good for Utah, but then they lost to Arizona 23-10 at home, and it's going to be hard to come back from that. Just like Texas Tech, they're going to have to win out. Arizona finds their way onto the list after being taken off, as they beat New Mexico and NAU in weeks 1 and week 2, before then getting dismantled against K-State. They ended up making up for it, as this past week they went on the road and beat number 10 Utah and got a good win on their resume. Arizona, though, is in the same boat as the others, as they really have to win the conference or win out. Just like them, you have Colorado. Colorado has been a surprise, as after struggling with North Dakota State, they've ended up winning 3 of 4. They lost to Nebraska, but would beat Colorado State and Baylor, and most recently UCF. They now have 2 wins over Power 5 teams, and with a showdown against K-State in 2 weeks, we'll find out a lot more, but again, same boat. K-State's also in that same boat, as they beat UT Martin in week 1 and then barely survived against Tulane in week 2. They got a good win over number 20 Arizona in week 3, but then got destroyed against BYU on the road in week 4. This past weekend, they beat number 20 Oklahoma State, who I don't think is very good anymore, and right now K-State is 4-1, and they probably have the best chance of anyone else in the Big 12 at getting to the playoff, but they have to figure some things out here and win out. So the 2 teams that are really in the running for this spot right now are Iowa State and BYU. Iowa State is one of 2 unbeaten teams left in the Big 12, as they have wins against North Dakota, Arkansas State, and then 2 road victories over Power 4 teams in number 21 Iowa and Houston. While honestly Iowa State does not look like a playoff team, they are still undefeated and they are in the running to win the Big 12 and have not lost a game yet. So yeah, they are in the running, but I don't think they're going to win it. That's why at number 1 I have BYU. The Cougars are the surprise of this year's team in the Big 12, as they are currently 5-0 and have 3 wins over Power 4 teams. They beat SMU on the road in week 2, destroyed number 13 K-State, and most recently beat Baylor. They also have wins against Wyoming and Southern Illinois, and for now BYU is the most deserving team of a playoff spot in the Big 12. They're my pick to win the conference, and that locks them in at number 4 in the country. Remember, the winner of a Power 4 conference gets a bye, so that's why BYU makes that 4th spot. Now we get to the last Power 4 conference, and that is the ACC. At number 6, I have the SMU Mustangs. Currently, they are 4-1 and have had a good first year in the ACC Conference. They beat Nevada, Houston Christian, TCU, and most recently Florida State, and so far they have 2 wins over Power 4 teams and have that 3-point loss to BYU, which isn't looking like a bad loss anymore. They'll have an opportunity pretty quickly to get better wins, as they'll go on the road and play Louisville, and then after that, their toughest games are against Duke and Pitt. If SMU goes 11-1, it'll be tough to keep them out. Louisville's also in a similar position. They don't have as good of a resume, as they only beat Jacksonville State, Austin Peay, and Georgia Tech in weeks 1 through 3. Then this past weekend, they lost by 7 on the road to Notre Dame. But they could play their way in, as they have games against SMU, Miami, Boston College, Clemson, and Pitt, plus Kentucky from the SEC. Louisville is a tough schedule, but they could build a resume. Clemson's an interesting team because they have 1 loss already. They got their crap kicked in by Georgia in week 1, but since then they've bounced back, putting up 66 points against App State, 59 against NC State, and 40 against Stanford. They have 3 straight solid wins, and now they have a pretty easy schedule. Their toughest games from here on out are against Louisville, Pitt, and South Carolina, and honestly I think Clemson will win out and go 11-1. We'll see though if that's enough to get them into the playoff with that 1 loss to Georgia. So yeah, Duke is 5-0, and while I don't think they're going to make the playoff, they have to be taken more seriously because they are 5-0 into October. They've beaten Elon, Northwestern, UConn, Middle Tennessee State, and most recently North Carolina. I don't think Duke will last that much, as I personally think they're going to lose to Georgia Tech this weekend. And like the rest of these teams, and Duke has a chance to get there if they can somehow go 11-1 or 12-0, but games against SMU and Miami are going to be very difficult. Okay, at number 2 we have the Pittsburgh Panthers, who I think are legit this year. They beat Kent State and Youngstown State in their beatdown games, and then beat both Cincinnati and West Virginia. Both of those games they came from behind to win, and right now Pitt has 2 solid victories. Their schedule kind of lines up for them, as their most difficult games are at the end, as in the month of November they play Clemson, Louisville, and Boston College to finish the season, and also have a road game against SMU. If Pitt can somehow make it through the month of November, they could find themselves into the college football playoff. Finally, we have the cream of the crop of the ACC, and that is the Miami Hurricanes. After beating Florida in Week 1, they have been cruising ever since then. They beat Florida A&M, killed Ball State, and killed USF. They ended up getting lucky against Virginia Tech in that Hail Mary attempt, but ultimately Miami is the best team in the ACC, and the conference hopes that this team can make it pretty far. Cam Ward, Damian Martinez, and Xavier Restrepo are all extremely exciting, and right now Miami will punch a first round bye. Okay, so now let's get to my actual bracketology. At number 25, we have the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. That loss to Northern Illinois and not being in a conference will really hurt them. At number 24, I have Illinois. At number 23, I have Oklahoma. At number 22, I have K-State. At number 21, I have USC. At number 20, I have Duke. And at number 19, I have James Madison. All 7 of those teams are still in playoff contention and have an opportunity to build resumes. Getting closer to the actual bracket, I have Rutgers at 18, Indiana at 17, Michigan at 16, LSU at 15, Iowa State at 14, and Ole Miss at 13. So that leads us to the actual bracket. So the 4 teams that get byes because they win their conference championships are number 1, Alabama at 4-0, number 2 will be Ohio State at 4-0, number 3 will be Miami at 5-0, and number 4 will be BYU at 5-0. Those are the winners of the Big 12, SEC, ACC, and Big 10. So now we get to the actual matchups, and the first game we'll have is number 12 UNLV, who's 4-0, playing against number 5 Texas. Texas gets that number 1 overall at-large bid, and they'll be playing against the top group of 5 team in the UNLV Rebels. That could be an interesting one, and the winner would play BYU. In the 8-9 game, I have that number 9 Georgia, who's 3-1, and Oregon, who is 4-0. This would be a really fun matchup, and these 2 teams are in good spots right now. In the 11-6 game, at number 11, I have the Missouri Tigers at 4-0, getting the last spot in the field, and then Penn State taking the second at-large seed. Finally, the last game would be at number 10, Pittsburgh, and number 7, Tennessee. People might shake their head, but again, Pittsburgh's undefeated, and if the playoffs started today, it would be unreasonable for them to not actually make it. Tennessee's on a roll right now, and they ended up getting the 3rd best at-large bid in my eyes. So this, in my opinion, would be a really fun college football playoff bracket. But again, this is just my opinion, and I hope to be a lot less biased. There's still something to be said for being undefeated this time in the year, so while these rankings will definitely shift a lot over the coming weeks and teams will cement themselves, for now this is what I came up with, and I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, be sure to let me know your thoughts down below, let me know what I got right and wrong, and if I should do this series each and every week. Also, don't forget to check out all of the videos on the end screen, and I hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.